Hello, friends. Before we start the show, I want to thank Verger CBD products. Verger CBD offers only the highest quality CBD products for relaxation, rejuvenation, and concentration. In addition to topicals, edibles, and flower, Verger has a wide variety of skincare products and CBD for your pets as well. Check them out on Facebook or on their website at vergercbd.com. That's Verger, VERDURECBD.com. Also, be sure to take advantage of a special 10% off for our listeners with promo code UNKNOWN10 at checkout.
Thousands of people have mysteriously vanished in America's wilderness. Join us as we dive into the deep end of the unexplainable and try to piece together what happened. You are listening to Locations Unknown.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Locations Unknown. I'm your co-host, Joe Irado, and with me, as always, is a guy who can pick oranges from an apple tree and make the best lemonade you've ever tasted, Mike Vandebogart.
Thanks, Joe, and how's it going, everybody out there? I hope everyone's surviving the ongoing pandemic. No new announcements for you guys this month, but I know Joe is working on getting some new hats ordered, so...
Yeah, it's going a little bit slower. It's going a little bit slower with all the stuff. It's hard to get through, so
yeah.
We'll keep pushing through, and hopefully we'll have them released soon.
Yeah, so just keep checking our Facebook page. We have our store on there. We still do have some hats and stickers for sale. If you want to help the show out, feel free to buy a few of those. I always say nothing looks better on the back of a nice car than a giant bumper sticker. So
absolutely, especially one of ours.
Yes.
All right, everybody, let's gear up and get out to explore Locations Unknown.
April 10th, 1952. 2-year-old Keith Parkins was playing with his older brothers on a cattle ranch in Ritter, Oregon. While playing near a barn on the property, his older brothers headed back to their house for lunch, leaving Keith at the barn. When his mother realized he hadn't returned with his brothers, they headed for the barn to find him. To their shock, Keith had vanished without a trace. Join us this week as we discuss the strange disappearance and discovery of Keith Parkins and the bizarre facts that surround this case.
Ritter, Oregon sits about 273 miles southeast of Portland, Oregon, near the Umatilla National Forest. The elevation of Ritter is about 2,549 feet, so it's not too high above sea level relative to the area around it. It is an unincorporated town, which, Mike, do you know what that means?
Very few people live there.
Well, that is the case, but so few people live there that there is no post office.
Oh, yeah,
to be incorporated, there has to be a post office in your town.
I did not know that, but I did read that at one point Ritter did have a post office, but then they lost it.
That's too bad. So the climate of Ritter, its coldest months are December and January, as you'd expect, when the nighttime temperatures average about 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The warmest months are July and August, where the daytime temps reach about 88 Fahrenheit. So very typical northwestern atmosphere. Dry throughout most of the year, not too much going on. And the terrain in the Umatilla National Forest is the Blue Mountains of northeast Oregon and southeast Washington, and cover an area of 1.4 million acres. Some interesting facts about the forest. The explorers Lewis and Clark passed through the area in 1805, and thousands of emigrants would later follow the Oregon Trail west, with many of them remaining in the Blue Mountain region.
Everybody who played Oregon Trail growing up, if you died and never made it to the end, this is where you would have gone.
Yep, this is where you win if you didn't die of dysentery on the way.
Yeah.
So, in 1851, gold was discovered in the region, and by the end of the gold boom, over $10 million in gold and silver were mined from the area. So that's $10 million in 1851. So that's a significant section of the area where the people actually made money. Mm-hmm. Remnants of the gold boom are still visible today in the national forest. There are even some active claims still getting mined. So there's a lot of gold in this area.
Yeah, and one thing to mention about the climate of the area is, like Joe said, it's typically pretty dry, but actually 2019 was one of the wettest years they had on record.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had almost 42 inches of rain and 205 inches of snow, which if you go and look at their averages is way, way, way above what they normally average in the area. So, yeah, they had a really wet year. And no reason why that I could read, but just interesting.
That's awesome. That's a lot of snow.
Yeah, that's a ton of snow.
That's a ton. So just to give you an idea of the animals that are in the area: moose, bighorn sheep, black bear, mountain goats, mule deer, white-tailed deer, timber wolves, cougars, coyotes. So a lot of big game. Mm-hmm. And we don't see that in a lot of the areas we follow, but out there it's healthy, lush, lots of vegetation, so you get some bigger game.
And definitely, a couple animals that I would worry about if I had small children hiking with me.
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously,
the cats
wolves and cougars. And obviously, black bears are, I'm less worried about a black bear versus a grizzly, but they're still a large predatory animal.
Especially if you're young and a young child out by yourself.
Yeah.
So 20% of the forest is actually designated as a wilderness zone. And area is generally rugged and mountainous. The peaks in the area approaching 9,000 feet. So you don't really have stuff going above tree line, but you still have altitude as a factor.
So, and I just want to, people might be wondering why we're talking about this national forest when the case happened in Ritter. Ritter is private property, but it's near this forest. So this forest is a good representation of the terrain and climate that Keith would have encountered in Ritter.
Yeah, and it gives you an idea, and I think people could imagine, just they've always seen pictures of like lush Oregon forests.
Yeah.
So I mean that's kind of what it like comes to mind when I think of it. As far as exposure goes, with areas that are approaching 9,000 feet in some of the areas, and possibly, obviously, especially in 2019, heavy rain and snow, exposure is definitely a potential risk or concern in that area. Lack of shelter, I don't know, with much of the area is designated wilderness and it's all below tree line, you're not going to run into like actual built shelters, but it's not like you're completely exposed all the time.
Not all the time. I did look up, obviously tree line changes kind of depending on where you are. If you're in Colorado,
if there's no trees just growing.
Yeah, so in the Oregon area, you kind of start to see trees disappear around the 6,500 to 7,000 feet range. So,
okay.
Yeah, so depending on what elevation you're at, you may be above the tree line. So,
wow.
And that does change. I know in Colorado it's much higher.
Yeah, it's like almost 11,000 feet in the Rockies.
Yeah, and even when we were in Mount Rainier, it was near 9,000 feet was the tree line there. So it really varies depending on where you're at.
That's crazy. I kind of want to know. I want to know more about that. I want to learn about that when we get off of here to find out because that's a significant difference.
Yeah.
Because there's like, when you get up to like 10,500 feet in Colorado, you start getting those, like the full growth of the tree is like 3 feet tall. You get like those little, and that's as big as they'll get. But that's like 3,000 feet higher up than this is.
I imagine it has to do probably something with the amount of rain they get.
Rain, or if it's like battered with wind and something just can't stay up at that altitude, maybe.
I know this area in Oregon is drier, so I have a feeling that probably plays a role in where the tree line ends. I know Colorado, gets a lot more precipitation.
Oh, Mike, I have a theory that the Russians might be happy with. I wonder if they're getting those mountain hurricanes up there.
Right. That is an episode for a topic for another episode.
Yeah, I know, right? For those of you that think I'm crazy, I'm not. It's the Russian government that's crazy. When we did our Dyatlov Pass episode, one of the theories mentioned as to why the group went missing was that a hurricane got them in the mountains.
Yes. So if you want to hear some crazy theories, including mountain hurricanes, listen to our Dyatlov episode.
And that is how you plug your own podcast in your own podcast episode. All right. So I'll move on so we can get going. So difficulty in general, it's a heavily wooded, alpine, and mountainous area. So it's going to be typically high if you're out hiking, especially because when it's designated wilderness, that means unmanaged, basically. It's kind of like Bureau of Land Management stuff.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's wild. There might be some trails, but you're like more game trails or trails that people are making, but there's no rangers. There's none of that stuff going on like you'd see at a national park.
I looked up the trails in the national forest we're talking about, and most of the trails were moderate to high levels of difficulty. You can just picture a lot of ups and downs. The trails are probably not well maintained, so kind of rugged. Like we said, not a lot of shelters. So it's not, it's not going to be one of your more major national parks where there's well-defined flat trails that you can hike.
Yeah, you'll end up at a nice place where they're probably selling some water and food and all that other stuff. There's no services here. It's raw wilderness. So
Yep.
All right, so let's talk about Keith Parkins. When Keith disappeared, he's 2.5, and his age now, he's in his mid-60s. So back then, body, height, weight, everything, typical 2-year-old.
Yeah.
So he was last seen at the time of his disappearance in a hat, coat, and shoes. And personality, according to his mom at the time of his disappearance, he was a very happy child. He didn't have any medical issues. He had very little experience in the wilderness other than he lived in this heavily wooded area, kind of like the farm type suburb area. So he's not a city boy. So he's used to the outdoors type stuff, but he's a 2-year-old. So it's not gonna be he doesn't know what he's doing out there. The main actors in this story are going to be Adina, which is Keith's mom, Alan, which is Keith's father, and then we have some information from Les Stroud, who we've talked about him a couple times in this podcast. He's a survival expert that talks about these issues a lot.
We'll talk about some of the comments he made about this case and missing people in general at the end of this episode, but he brings up a lot of really interesting, kind of strange things that are going on.
No, what I really like about doing this show is, even though there's some repetitive stuff, I really feel like in each case, I kind of learn something each case. I'll hear something that makes me think differently about my previously held beliefs about search and rescue, per se, or what can happen to people out there. So I really enjoy doing this stuff and continually hearing from people like Les. So let's go into the timeline, man.
The timeline here, and I just want to let everyone know that this episode obviously is going to be a shorter episode. The timeline's pretty thin. It was a long time ago, and I won't spoil what happens at the end, but it's more about what happened in the middle of the story that is really the mysterious part about this. So obviously we said it all started on April 10th, 1952. So, today is April 15th. So, close to this time period around Easter, it was 12 p.m. lunchtime, and Edna, I probably got that wrong. Alan, Keith, and his 2 older brothers were visiting their grandparents in Ritter, Oregon. They were visiting a property that they described as a cattle ranch. This whole area around Ritter is kind of cattle country. That's what they described it as. Edna described the conditions the day Keith went missing. It was cold with patches of snow on the ground. So I'm guessing probably in the 30s, cold, kind of a lot like today was here in Milwaukee. It's around lunchtime. Keith and his older brothers had gone to a barn on the property to see a new calf that had just been born. And their mother, called out to them, like, hey, lunch is ready. So the 2 older boys headed back to the house for lunch. And when they got there, Keith's mom's like, all right, where's Keith? And they're like, oh, he went around the barn. And so she's like, all right, well, let's go get him. They all walk back to the barn, and to their shock, Keith's gone without a trace. So I'm guessing maybe 10, 15 minutes went by between the point when Keith's brothers saw him and the time that he was gone. So not a lot of time passed in between that. We fast forward to the afternoon on the 10th. So realizing Keith was gone, a search started within hours of his disappearance. So we're not talking a big search and rescue operation. Those really didn't happen yet in 1952. And Keith's mother even noted that it wasn't organized like a modern search and rescue, but the initial people searching knew what they were doing.
Well, and I'm wondering too, like back then on a farm type setting, I'm guessing the kids kind of wandered a lot, and so maybe they weren't thinking it was as like, probably still scary. You have a 2.5-year-old kid, can wander a little bit, can kind of move around his own. It'll make you nervous, but you're probably not thinking the worst right off the bat.
Yeah.
Until it starts getting later and later.
And pictures from this area, it's a cattle ranch, so it's pretty open. If you have a cattle ranch, you need open land for the cattle to graze. So it's not like a thick forest and he wandered 10 feet away from the barn and just vanished. I mean, it's wide open plains that they were on. So it's strange that he would wander off like that, away from his brothers. He didn't have a handicap or any mental issues. So there's already a question of why did he wander off? Like the mother noted, people started searching right away. This wasn't what we would consider a modern search and rescue operation. I'm sure initially it was just the parents, the brothers, and anyone else, grandparents, probably anyone around the cattle ranch, farmhands, whoever was there probably just started looking around.
Yeah.
And she said people started in a line of people spread out within distance, like far enough, but they could still hear each other. And then they just kind of started walking. We're not talking canine units or aerial units or anything like that. You got some people on the ground far enough away that they can cover a decent space of ground, but they can still hear each other.
Yeah, basic friends and family just walking in a straight line and making sure they don't miss anything.
Yeah, so the mother noted that at the peak of the search, probably by evening, there was over 200 people in the field searching for Keith.
Oh, wow. That's so they must have phoned in the neighbors and stuff too.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people probably came out there and started searching. So a large group of people searching, not what we would consider a modern search and rescue operation, but nonetheless, they had a lot of people on the ground looking. Mm-hmm. And this search went through the night into the next morning. So the first, I would say, breakthrough in the search came that evening of the 10th. At some point around 3 miles from where Keith was initially last seen, searchers found footprints that were kind of going through a herd of cattle. Keith had gotten 3 miles away somehow, and he, for some reason, made tracks in that one spot. Maybe it was more wet where the cattle were walking. And so they saw just, a couple feet of tracks, but that was it. Outside of those tracks, there were no other clues about what happened to Keith, and he obviously wasn't in the area.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of strange.
But they as I said, you don't know much about the timeline. They don't know what the time was that this occurred in?
The tracks were found in the evening. They don't have a specific time. We do have a total elapsed time of disappearance, which I'll get into in a minute. But yeah, we don't have any. We know he went missing around noon, and we know the tracks were found in the evening on the 10th. Outside of that, we don't have a lot of other information on this specific detail. Nothing like some of the cases we do that are more recent.
Sure, and I'm sure they're assuming they're his tracks. They're probably really tiny or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they assume they're his tracks. So, all right, fast forward to April 11th. Around 7 a.m. on the next day, a searcher found Keith alive in Skull Canyon, roughly 12 miles from where he was last seen. He was...
Whoa!
Yeah. So he was found face down in the snow with his hat and coat beside him. His body was stiff from the cold and he couldn't move. His face had also been scratched up pretty bad, according to his mother, and his clothing was also ripped from what they assumed he was trying to climb through barbed wire fencing. And he was flown to the nearby hospital via private plane and eventually made a full recovery. So...
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's incredibly bizarre. And
that's a miracle.
Yeah, so...
you think about, an adult face down in the snow for too long, you're going to get hypothermia. Holy cow.
Yeah. So if you think about this, you've got a 2.5-year-old. It's cold enough where there's snow on the ground. He is by himself. survived through the night and somehow managed to travel 12 miles in rugged terrain through barbed wire fence, and did that all in 19 hours. I mean, that doesn't seem possible. You have young kids. Could one of your kids do that?
Well, I know. I can't imagine. Like, they would just sit down. Like, I can't imagine what would keep them moving, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
Right.
Like, especially with the searchers, I mean, they'd be crying. Like,
yeah.
Geez, that's crazy.
So, yeah, and this is an unusual case for us to do because he was found alive. Usually our cases, there's usually never any trace found. But I wanted to do this case just because it was so bizarre, the facts surrounding the case. So,
I think our podcast has evolved into interesting cases, not necessarily just those, because I mean, this thing started because it's just fun stuff we wanted to do. And I don't think that's ever going to change. So if we decide something's fun and we want to do it, well, then we're going to do it.
So the things that instantly jump out at me, and there weren't really any official theories on what happened to him because he was found and he made a full recovery. So they kind of, just kind of moved on. I even found some old newspaper articles about it, and none of them go into any.
They just weren't interested in figuring out
what the hell happened.
How the heck it happened.
Yeah. So think about this. You got a two and a half year old kid who I saw pictures of. So they actually interviewed Keith when he was in his 60s. So recently, in the last few years, and he was holding up the clothing that he was wearing at the time of his disappearance. And it's not like winter clothing. He had, normal clothes and overalls on and a coat and some shoes. And he had a hat with the little earmuffs that flip down. That was it. And
yeah, it was like, I'm going to play outside for a little bit in cold weather, but not survive the, 18 hours or whatever.
Somehow he walked 12 miles in just 19 hours through very rugged terrain. I'll go into some of the comments that Les Stroud made, but he actually tried to recreate the path that Keith would have taken. And he said it was hard for he's a trained survivalist, and it was hard for him to do it. And he's like,
well, even if he's not a trained survivalist, he's an adult, not a 2-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. And so how did this little child go 12 miles in rugged terrain through the middle of the night in what I'm assuming is below freezing temperatures because there's snow on the ground? How did he do that? Why was his face all torn up? His clothes were all torn up. I mean, he could have, I guess, tried to get through a barbed wire fence. That's, I guess, the official theory of why he was so scratched up and his clothing was scratched up. But yeah, it's just a really bizarre set of circumstances. Later on in his life, he goes on to say that he doesn't have any recollection of what happened in those 19 hours, which is strange too. Because the authorities asked Keith after they found him, the next day in the hospital, what happened to you? And he couldn't remember. He's like, I don't know what happened. And then they asked him, what happened to your face? And he said, a cat scratched me.
But were his clothes? I don't know. Were his clothes ripped up, or
his overalls or his pants or whatever he was wearing were kind of torn up a bit? And the police assumed that it was because he was trying to get through barbed wire fence. So, and maybe that's why his face was scratched up. But Keith, he specifically said that a cat scratched his face. So, and he even says in the interview, he was holding up the cap that he wore and his little earmuffs. He said, I took it off for whatever reason. I was wearing my cap. I was carrying my cap in my coat, and I had that alongside of me while I was laying on the ground. He was laying in the prone position on the ground. He has no recollection of what happened over that 19-hour period, which is strange. You would think, I would understand if you ask somebody when they're 65 what happened to you when you're 2.5 and you don't remember, but you would think a 2.5-year-old would be able to recall what happened to him the day before, right?
Well, especially if it was traumatic.
Yeah.
And that seems like something traumatic.
Yeah, so...
Or there's always the thing where they have issues where something traumatic happens and the brain blocks it out.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was a direct quote from Keith in his 60s. Someone interviewed him about the case, and he goes, "No nightmares about it at all. I don't recall at all anything about it. They asked me what happened, and I told them I didn't know. I didn't know what happened when they asked. I had quite a few scratches on my face and hands. Someone asked me how I got those, and I told them a cat had scratched me. So I had no recollection of what happened to me." So that was a direct quote from Keith as an adult. And just a bizarre case. Instantly in my head, I'm thinking about, all right, animal attack, rule that out. They found him. If a cougar would have attacked him, a cougar probably would have killed him.
Do they have any pictures of the site where they found him face down in the snow?
I've seen pictures of it. It looks like kind of just like an open, like flat, plain area, kind of in like a mountainous region. So nothing out of the ordinary.
I'm saying more like, or I guess less pictures and more do they describe like. Here's what I'm getting at. Are we officially in our theories now? Because I have a theory.
Yeah, we can move the theories.
Okay, because I didn't know if there's more information before I spout out my theory, because there's something that I want to, my gut thing right away was, I think that's too far for him to travel on his own. That mixed with what he said, and I think I said it in an earlier episode, I feel like you can always take a child's word as truth, but you have to interpret the truth, because they're not capable of fully explaining the truth in a way that an adult will understand. So when he says a cat got him, my immediately thought is one of two things. One thing, something did kind of attack him. And I've never heard of this happening before, so this is kind of a stretch. But imagine like a cougar grabbing him and carrying him for a while or something, like by his coat or pants, and then leaving him there or something. Or somehow over 19 hours, I mean, if you think about it, it's a little over a half a mile per hour, which I guess wandering, yes, but like I can't imagine a 2-year-old, because that would be a constant speed of just over a half a mile an hour to do that, 12 miles in 19 hours. Did he get that far, collapse of exhaustion, and an animal came along and actually like slept on him or like cuddled into him to like, not necessarily to protect him, but almost like I've seen animals try and keep themselves warm.
Yeah.
And maybe was clawing at him or nuzzling in. Otherwise, like how do you survive? The human body cannot do that. The only person I know of that can survive something like that is the Iceman from the Netherlands.
Right.
I forget his name. He has a very unique name. But like they put him in freaking ice tanks in a laboratory to study, because they said it's so incredible that he's
Doesn't
able
he
to
swim in like frozen water? Like,
he climbed Everest in shorts and flip-flops.
That's crazy.
You're like, yeah, he can. They put him in a tank of ice water for like several hours, and he was able to maintain his body temperature at a perfect 92 point whatever, like 92.8 the whole time. And he says it's just with meditation and breathing.
Yeah,
he can control his body temperature. He can make it go up and down at will.
That's crazy.
They've studied him, and there's a great documentary on him. It's called like The Iceman.
Yeah.
But like there you go. A guy that can do it for a couple hours in ice has a documentary, and he's famous.
Yep.
So this kid survived 19 hours through the night in ice as a 2-year-old.
Yes.
That's just insane to me. Like it's a legitimate miracle, or like an animal kept him warm. And as they were approaching that site, it scared the animal away. So that's what I was kind of getting at. Like, was there impressions of animal footprints around him when they found him? Like, is there clues in that regard of, there's no way he laid in the snow all night long and was still alive?
No, so there was no, in my research of the case, there was no specific details about the site where they found him. No mention of any kind of animal tracks or any kind of struggle or anything like that. They just literally said they found him face down, kind of in the prone position in snow.
And you know what, too, if they found him, if you can imagine, because at first I was like, come on, they didn't document it. I'm like, oh, wait, if you're approaching a 2-year-old's body face on the snow, you're probably running up to it and grabbing him and just getting him out of there.
Yeah, and actually, one of the accounts of this said that a searcher initially found the kid, but Keith's father was about 100 yards behind him and just started like sprinting towards him and literally just grabbed him and picked him up and like started running him out of there.
Yeah, like you think it like that's what he probably ran faster than a human could run. Like you get that like flight or fight, but it's like your child in danger. Like not thinking about the integrity of the site.
Yeah, so it's just a shocking set of facts surrounding this case, and like I said, I don't know how a 2-year-old can go 12 miles in roughly 19 hours in rugged terrain in the middle of the night with I would say he's not wearing clothes appropriate for winter climate. And surviving the night, even if he hadn't gone 12 miles, I would say it would be a miracle that he survived the, sub-freezing night. But he went 12 miles.
If he was wearing clothes designed for Arctic research, like you still can't sleep in the snow. You would need a tent and a sleeping bag. Like that's what's crazy. So it's like even if he was wearing winter clothes, it's still not possible.
The other thing that is puzzling is what caused him to leave the area where the barn and the cattle area. Why,
Yeah, and if it's wide open, like
it's wide open, it's
point,
cattle
he's gonna
land.
be like you can see it and make your way back. But he
Yeah.
continued on for.
Why would he just keep walking?
Maybe following an animal or something. But like,
yeah, I don't know. I mean,
that's crazy.
The scratches on his face and hands and clothing makes me feel like, I mean, I don't obviously know how how cougars operate with, prey, but is it possible that a cat would have started dragging him off to a place to...
That's kind of what I was thinking about the distance. Like, if he walked a little bit, but then like something was grabbing him and pulling him, like, or carrying him. Because I mean,
but a cougar's not going to drag a 2-year-old for 12 miles.
That's 100%. Like if they're going to attack, they're going to want to deal with it there.
And when you see some of the terrain of the area, it's not like he was going 12 miles on open grassland.
Were they searching constantly through the night?
Yeah, they searched all the way through the night into the morning.
Is it possible? Okay, how about this?
Okay.
What if a cougar did get him?
Yeah.
And the search party was pushing the cougar constantly the whole time, and the cougar was pulling the kid, waiting for the opportunity to basically eat it.
Okay.
But like the search party kept pushing it, so it's like it's not going to abandon the prey, but it's going to keep dragging it, eventually just gave up.
So maybe Keith walked at least the 3 miles to where they found his tracks.
Yeah.
Walked on his own, and then the rest of the way, or maybe he walked a little further past that, and the rest of the way, a cougar attacked him, and maybe that's why he doesn't have memory of what happened.
Yeah, maybe he passed out or something or whatever. But
anybody listening that
cougar
knows
experts,
any cougar experts out there, and we're not talking about frat guys that go to the bars.
I bit my tongue, so I'm glad you said it.
If anyone listening is an expert in, kind of big cats in the wild, please comment on this episode if Joe and I are totally talking out of our ass.
I'm sure we are.
But if you look at all the facts, outside of human-caused disappearance, I don't know what else could cause a 2-year-old to go, 12 miles in, less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
It just, nothing makes sense. And to piggyback off that, I've got some quotes from Les Stroud, my favorite survival expert. So he writes, 8 miles, that's as the crow flies. It's impossible to walk out there as a crow would fly. In the span of less than 24 hours, you'd have to believe that this 2-year-old covered perhaps as many as 12 miles. And he goes, as it was, his clothing was found ripped, and we figure it's likely from barbed wire fences, either going through them or under them. And even with a full moon, you wouldn't be able to see anything going through the brush. So if I'm a 2-year-old child and I've got to walk through this or crawl through this, I get to this time of night, I can't see Keith going anywhere. I can't go anywhere. How a 2-year-old could travel the topography I'm traveling now, little shoes, and it was freezing temperatures, even if he was a kid full of energy. So Les Stroud he obviously doesn't know how this kid would have gotten to where he was. He was even basically saying that he himself, being a full-grown adult man and a survival expert who does this kind of stuff professionally, he wouldn't be able to do that in 24 hours in the middle of the night.
That's so gnarly.
So it's a puzzling case. I mean, it's amazing that they found him alive.
It's awesome. I can't imagine what the parents went through and how, like, the feeling of getting because it's the like mom, you tell so many stories that they end in just tragedy, and like it's so nice to have, like, even though it's crazy and befuddling, it's just great to have one that ends kind of happy.
Yeah, it's a puzzling case, and even the parents go on to say years later after this happened that at the time they didn't make a big deal of this at all. They didn't want to scare Keith they didn't want to scare him of the outdoors or being alone at night or anything like that. And Keith had no recollection of what happened to him, so
they just kind of let it go. And
they kind of let it go. It's bizarre. If I had a kid and this happened to him, I wouldn't rest until what the hell happened to him? How did he get there?
Yeah.
I would not let it die. And they were the exact opposite. They're just like, well, we found him. Let's just move on.
Yeah, jeez. It's a tough farm folk from the 50s.
Yeah, I mean, it was a different era, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll end this episode with a final quote from my favorite survival expert. Les Stroud writes, "It's the kind of baffling case that has you sit back and go, nothing that I can put my finger on in a normal set of circumstances in the wilderness makes any sense to this case whatsoever. It's something other."
Yeah, that's perfectly put. I don't know. It's almost not worth even guessing.
No, so just to recap, the only two theories I can really think of is, like you said, Joe, maybe a cat attacked Keith at some point in his, after the 3 mile point where his tracks were found, and started dragging him, and the search party kept pushing the cat farther out. That's why Keith ended up, roughly 12 miles away with scratches on his face, and maybe the cat even kind of hunkered down at times, right? Like kind of protecting its prey.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. And eventually they pushed it so far, it gave up.
Yeah. Like morning was approaching. It just ran off.
Jeez.
I would love to have seen the area where they found him to see if there's like drag marks or, any kind of struggle, like cat hair or something like that, but we'll never know. It was the 50s. I'm sure they probably just moved on because they found him alive. But that, or it was human caused, but I just don't see that really. Just the terrain, and I mean, it would have had to have been somebody that worked on the ranch.
Yeah. And it's just a weird way of where the body was and everything. It wouldn't make sense to have human involvement. It's too random.
Yeah.
There's no pattern.
No.
All right.
So, another little shorter episode for people to chew on. This one's a real strange one. I know there's a lot of people out on the internet have done, analysis on this case. It's an old one. So hopefully we added a little different twist to it.
Yeah. My crazy cat's got him. The searchers are pushing the cat theory.
I mean, what else could it be?
What else could it be?
Maybe Bigfoot.
Or, there you go. Bigfoot aliens. Was caring for him. Like how sometimes like the gorilla, like the kids will fall in the zoo and the gorilla saves it.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
man.
I don't know. So, any last words, Joe, before we sign off?
No, just thanks again for tuning into the show. We appreciate all of you for listening and sharing Locations Unknown with your friends and family. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also have our YouTube channel where we're posting not only our show, but Mike's always putting up some national park stuff. A lot of interesting videos about the different parks and the animals in the park, so it's always a good watch. If you'd like to support the show, please visit the Facebook store. We still have some of the older hats. Those are still around, and we're going to be ordering new ones soon. And you can always donate on our Patreon account by searching Locations Unknown.
And leave comments and anything about our episodes on any of the various platforms, good or bad. Leave them. We take it all.
Yeah, absolutely.
The negative ones are sometimes hard to read, but you know what? We're thick-skinned. But we like the nice ones. We like more of the nice ones, though.
Yeah, leave nice comments unless you're really, really unhappy.
Yeah.
And always remember, when enjoying the beauty of nature, whether backpacking, camping, or just taking a walk, to leave no trace. Except that now you shouldn't be doing any of that, apparently. So, thanks, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.